I know I'll try to enunciate and speak clearly with the mask on. Nice to see everyone. Welcome. Appreciate you all coming. I'm going to call the meeting to order. 7:02. This is our annual meeting of the Northern Mountain Valley Unified Union School District. So we have a number of articles on which we will vote, and then afterwards we will, Morgan and Lynn will present the budget, and we're here to field any questions. So first off, the legal voters of the Northern Mountain Valley Unified Union School District, consisting of the towns of Bakersfield, Berkshire, Montgomery, and Sheldon, are hereby warned and notified to meet at the Bakersfield Elementary School in Bakersfield, Vermont on Wednesday, February 21st, 2024 at 7 p.m. to transact the following business. So Articles 4 through 6 are going to be voted on by Australian ballot at the respective polling places and times named on for Tuesday, March 5th, 2024. All of those voting locations and hours of operation are in our annual book. They can be found on our website. I suspect they're on all of the individual town websites as well. And we'll certainly be putting out information on various platforms to just remind people that about that town meeting day vote, and that will be the budget vote as well as electing a number of school board representatives from a few of the towns whose terms are up and due for re-election. So Article 1 tonight is to elect a moderator. I'll take nominations for that.
I'll nominate Mary Niles.
Any other nominations? Okay, hearing none, we will vote on the moderator. Me being right, we're doing a vote, right?
You can ask the district clerk to cast one ballot.
Oh, okay, that would be great if we can cast that one ballot. Okay. So we're good to go? All right. 2, to elect a clerk. Any nominations?
I'll nominate Emily Fector.
Great. Any other nominations? Okay. So hearing only the one nomination for Emily Fecto, we'll cast that ballot for Emily. Thank you. Okay, and then Article 3, shall the Northern Mountain Valley Unified Union School District vote to elect all officers by Australian ballot?
And so if you want, I can speak to this one.
Yeah.
This, we had a conversation before the meeting about the confusion around the informational meeting versus this meeting versus town meeting day meeting. The two positions that we just voted on, town clerk or the district clerk and the moderator, are the only two pieces of business that we do at this in-person meeting. If this article passes, we would elect the district clerk and the moderator the same way we vote on the budget and we elect the school board directors. And so that would be pushed off to town meeting day on paper ballot. And then what that allows us to do is give us a little more flexibility in terms of when and where we hold the informational meetings, because we don't have to kind of hold that at a time when the district clerk can come with the voter checklist to make sure that everybody voting is an actual resident.
All right. Thanks, Morgan. Okay, great. And Morgan, do we need to do, can we just?
So that can be a vote by voice.
Okay, so we'll all in favor of moving to vote and to elect all officers by Australian ballot?
Aye.
Great. All opposed? Okay, so Article 3 passes. And so just to clarify again for anyone watching, that will now mean that we really will merge essentially our annual meeting and informational meeting. We'll have one each year in advance of voting on town meeting day, where everyone will vote for school board members, moderator, clerk, and obviously the big budget vote. Great. So that concludes any formal voting and business.
And so I will we'll start this off with the rest of the presentation tonight. And I'm hoping I can do this without a microphone. It's a crowd is twice as big as it was last year, so I don't know if my voice will project that far. But on town meeting day, the first articles that you will see to vote on are the election of 3 school district officers. Those terms rotate, and this year the terms that are up are 1 in Berkshire, 1 in Montgomery, and 1 in Sheldon. And those town designations are for who is allowed to run for those positions. And so everybody who is a legal voter of NMV gets to vote on each of those positions, no matter where you live. And then well, you can go to the next slide, Courtney. I think as we go through this presentation, I just want to acknowledge to folks the chaos that has been the budgeting process this year. We will talk a little bit later about Act 127 and what those changes mean to the state and to our districts. But there have been a lot of changes even as late to today in terms of how that law is being implemented. And so the information that we're presenting to you tonight is really up to the minute in terms of where we're projecting tax rates to end up. There's a bill that's sort of changing the rules that was sent to the governor's desk today, and I expect that that'll be signed by him in the next few days. And so we like to start the conversations with a look at the district-wide enrollment. Everything on the left half of this graph is actual data. So these are counts of kids who are registered in our schools on October 1st. You can see we've split it up by the 4 schools. So Sheldon is red up at the top, and Berkshire in green, Montgomery in blue, and then Bakersfield is the red line down at the bottom. From 2004 outwards are projections that we share with the board. So we're looking at how big the classes are that are coming up through the grades, and generally how many kids have moved in or out of town or in and out of our schools over the past few years, and tried to look forward and see where those enrollments are going. You can see by this that we're right now projecting a pretty significant increase in Sheldon Elementary. There's been growth in that community over the past few years. A little bit of a drop in Bakersfield and Berkshire. Montgomery predicted to stay relatively flat. All these trend lines, I would say, are pretty gentle compared to the rest of the state, and we're just not seeing the loss of kids that southeastern Vermont is seeing. The only other thing that I would point out on this is that you'll see from the 2019 count to the 2020 count, there's a pretty significant drop. That was the COVID dip when we went virtual and lost a lot of kids from our schools. And so you'll see us climbing out of that. And as we go another year or 2 out, we expect that these trends will be more predictable and will level out as we finally put that behind us. The second article that you will see when you vote on town meeting day or you vote early at your town clerk's offices is the article to approve the budget. This is the article that, if passed, gives the school board authority to spend up to that $22.8 million. We will go into the details of that as we move through, but that's kind of the one that we're all talking about and the one that everyone's focused on for town meeting day. As the board went through the budget planning process, we always started first with the board goals, and I'll let Mary talk a little bit about the 3 overarching goals that we've been using over the last few years now.
So the development of the board goals took place over a span of a few years. with the board being really thoughtful about opportunity enhancement across all 4 schools, and really wanting to kind of create a school system, not only in NMV, but Enosburg, Richford, and across our whole SU, that really elevates the opportunities available to our students. But the 3 kind of driving kind of mission goals here are that by June of 2027, all students will be reading on grade level by the end of grade 3. Excuse me. Wait, sorry, something in my eye. The second main goal is that the class of 2028 will use a body of evidence from courses and/or flexible pathways to demonstrate proficiency in the portrait of learner indicator skills required for graduation. And then
Make a comment about that.
Yeah.
It's slightly different than how it reads in the book. That's been updated recently, so the language is slightly different. We'll
Right.
have that corrected for next year's.
Yeah,
report.
right, thanks for that clarification, Lynn. And lastly, by June of 2027, all students in FNESU will demonstrate proficiency by the end of each grade level band in the social emotional learning, or SEL, priority standards. And so, when we sit down to develop the budget in a really methodical and thoughtful way, we're always kind of keeping these centered as we kind of look at everything from, teacher needs, staffing needs, curriculum needs, all of it kind of centered on these particular goals.
So we then talked with the board about some of the sort of macro factors that are going on in our world as we work through the budget. And the first 5 of these are really ones that are, by and large, impacting every school district in the state. We're all seeing an increase in the number of students with social emotional needs. That's been a kind of a steady trend or a steady reality since we've been coming out of COVID. This is the first year of those revised pupil weights under Act 127, which we'll talk about later. The last batch of COVID funding from the federal government is expiring this next year. In this budget, we are moving 1 position from the ARP ESSER, the big COVID grant that's ending, into the local budget. PCB remediation has been kind of working its way through the state. Of our 4 schools, 2 have been tested. In Berkshire, there are some PCBs that have been found, and we are kind of working our way through that. We've got kind of in the middle of developing a remediation plan based on those test results. In Sheldon as well, we've just gotten much lower level of PCB exposure, but one that we know that we're going to have to deal with, and we're at the beginning of the process of that in terms of identifying what the source is and what the appropriate solution is. We are doing this in the backdrop of Burlington spending a whole lot of money to correct their PCB problems, Cabot spending a lot of money correcting their PCB problems, and so far no dedicated, steady funding stream from the state to cover all these projects. So I think we, the administration and the board, because that's what we're telling them, will feel very lucky if we can slip Berkshire's project into the current pot of money that's available. But we are going to need some long-term solution from the legislature if all the schools are going to be testing positive around us. Lastly, health insurance premium increases have gone up 16.4%. This is the second year of double-digit increases. This is an area where 5-10 years ago we negotiated at the individual board level. That was moved to a statewide negotiation system, ostensibly to save money. That has not panned out yet. I know the legislature is looking at some changes to that process, which may help. But I think everybody knows the cost of healthcare is going up, and that's one of the more significant drivers of the budget this year. And then the last two are more specific to Franklin Northeast, or to Nmvuusd particularly. We are in negotiations with our support staff. We know that wages all across the state and country have been rising pretty significantly, so we are budgeting, I think, an appropriate amount for where that process will end, but those negotiations are ongoing. And then for NMV specifically, we have a very large 8th grade class that is going to high school next year, and we have to pay those high school tuition bills because we only operate through 8th grade. We have a relatively small senior class this year that's leaving. So there's an additional 40, 47, 48 students that we're anticipating paying tuition bills for. We expect another increase next year. 7th grade is large relative to 11th grade. The increase shouldn't be as steep if the numbers don't change. But that's kind of the big picture stuff going on. And then go to the next slide, Courtney. We'll start talking about some of the staffing changes specific to the buildings, because as you'll see later, if we pull out those high school tuition bills, really our budget is mostly in terms of salaries and benefits for staff.
Morgan, can you note how much increase the tuition is?
Yeah, so it's, I believe it's over $1 million increase just for that high school tuition line, and the details will be in the budget detail in the book. But that's, it's a significant increase. We, again, will expect another increase next year, but not to that same extent. And at this point, we're also guessing at where the students are going to go, so we don't really know what the tuition rates will be. We sort of assume that most of them will go to Enosburg or Richford or Maple Run, because that's where the bulk of our kids go.
Units?
Yep.
So you're saying $1 million is about a difference of 44 students, was it?
48, yeah.
And so it's about 20,000 a student?
It's not 20,000, it's probably like 18 a student, but there's also inflation on all those kids that we knew were going from 9th to 10th. But, yeah, good question. So in terms of staffing changes in this building, this budget proposes bringing the music teacher up to full-time from 4 days a week to 5 days a week, and bringing a family engagement coordinator in who's currently paid out of ESSER funds, and leave them in the building for 2 days a week. In Berkshire, adding a half-time health teacher, and we'll talk a little bit later about a reduction in health teacher district-wide. Pulling out a 1.0 interventionist position that we haven't been able to fill. 3 days of a family engagement coordinator. 2 of those days are currently paid out of ESSER, but the concept would be that Berkshire and Bakersfield would share one person, and that person would go between those 2 schools. And then the addition of an assistant principal position at Berkshire, which is similar to what we did in Sheldon last year, 2 years ago. In Montgomery, also adding a half-time health teacher. That would be bringing a current half-time person up to full-time. Additional paraeducator support there. Bringing 1 day of a family engagement coordinator in, currently paid out of ESSER. And then bringing a custodian from half-time to full-time. So they would have the same custodial support that the other three schools have. In Sheldon, addition of a health teacher, and addition of a STEM unified arts teacher. In the budget last year, we expanded the middle school grades for the classroom teachers. That's where the school that we're seeing the growth, and the school that hadn't been bringing their staffing up to the same levels that we've enjoyed in the other districts, I would say. So two additional teachers there. Again, family engagement coordinator. That person would be shared with Montgomery, so one day a week in Montgomery, 4 in Sheldon. And then a shared position who would serve as office assistant as well as paraeducator as needed in that building. Sheldon had always had 2 positions. We reduced that at one point a few years ago, and we're finding that that the need is maybe not 2 full-time, but it was more than 1. And then district-wide, we have been advertising for a health teacher that we had planned to send around to all 4 schools. We've not been able to find someone to fill that, so we're hoping those pieces specific to schools will be easier to fill. And then we're moving a tech integrationist position that was serving all 4 NMV schools. That position is occupied, but as we've seen that develop over the year, we've decided that we can pull that into the SU budget as well and have them support all 8 schools. And then finally, this budget proposes adding a school resource officer, which would serve all 4 schools. And so for the kind of the net changes of all that, we're looking at an additional 3.2 professional staff, so licensed staff, 2.5 support staff, and then that 1 contracted position with the SRO. These graphs will break out first the NMV budget and then the SU-wide budget. Allows you to look at it a couple of different ways. So in this one, the red half, roughly from noon to 6 o'clock, is what we spend on our people. These are our staff who are on our payroll. So that biggest piece is salaries. The dark red is health insurance, and then you'll see the other benefits that we provide to staff. The blue almost half circle are services that we buy. So this tends to be what we're paying other people to do work for us. So the biggest chunk of that is the tuition, that light blue from about 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock, which makes up almost 30% of the budget. And those are primarily those high school tuition bills that go out. The next biggest section is that other services, that white section. That would be at the SU level, food service, to and from school transportation, your special educators. It includes things like your insurance on your buildings, legal fees, staff travel. The dark blue is your debt service, so those are the bond payments that we're making on the buildings. And then that green wedge up at the top is the stuff that we buy. So that's fuel oil, it's propane, it's the pencils and the crayons and the paper that we buy. So a relatively small slice of the pie where I think people who don't dig into the budget think that that's where the waste is. That's less than 5% of the budget. Really, our budgets are in people and then those tuition bills that we send out. The next slide looks at it sort of in a different way. In this case, the green section is really instruction for kids. So this is kids in seats in our classrooms, or again, the tuition payments, kids in seats in other people's classrooms that we're paying them to take care of. The dark green is special ed at the district level, so that's primarily paraeducator support that are hired from the schools. The blue section is broadly called support, so starting at the bottom and moving around. That first slice is student support, so that would be things like nursing and guidance counselors. Instructional support would be library, technology, professional development for teachers. The thin blue line is your school board and some of the district-wide insurances that we pay. That next section, school administration, is primarily your principals in your 4 schools. Central services, that 11% is the amount of money that goes to support the supervisory union budget. And again, the 3 biggest pieces of that are your food service program, your special educators, and your transporting kids to and from school. The dark blue section, buildings and grounds, is what it takes to maintain our 4 school buildings. And then again, that little wedge at the top is the debt service on your buildings. If we go to the next one, this is that same look, but this is if we took Nmvuusd's budget and Enosburg-Richford's budget and then the money that we spend at the SU and combined it all together just to get an idea of what the organization as a whole is spending their money on. So similar breakdown, we start with the direct instruction as that first section. So that's kids and seats, coming around the clock, special education and vocational education are both kind of included in that instructional piece. The next smaller blue wedge is that student support, and then above that instructional support. General administration, again, is your board. That green is going to be your principals, along with some of the leadership at central office. Central services, that orange line is business office, human resources, technology at the SU. And then you can see transportation broken out on its own, food service broken out on its own, and then that debt service up top. We have also started to look at just the supervisory union budget and try to represent how much of that is spent in not only different areas, but in different buildings. So the smaller pieces working their way around the clock are the amounts of money that we know we spend directly in each school. This special education teacher is always at Bakersfield, and so we know that they're at Bakersfield. Those kind of work around. That dark green section, again, is food service. We don't really track how many Duffy specials are going to different schools, so we're leaving that in its own piece. Similar to transportation, that's down at the ESU level, and we don't really part it out by school. Coming back around the top first, RISE, STEPS, the Flexible Pathways Academy, those are the alternative programs that we have housed at the supervisory union, are accessible to all kids, but we're able to track those expenses separately. And then that big pink slice, the roughly third on the left, are the services that we are not necessarily trying to part out to schools. So the supervisory union budget contemplates 2 English language learner teachers. Because that population is so fluid, we don't sit here in February, 8 months before the school year starts and say, I know that they're going to spend 1 day in this school and 3 days in this school and 2 days in that school. We keep them flexible. Similar with the instructional coaches who will be deployed to help teachers either who are struggling or who are new hires, and we don't know what schools are going to have those new hires yet. And so as we kind of move through this process, we may be able to part more of that out to the schools, but we wanted to give the board, and because we did it for the board, we're doing it for the voters as well, an idea of where that money is spent.
There's a piece at the top that was cut off, the white at the very top of Bakersfield.
So any questions on those breakdowns before we get into this? Okay.
Food service is a big item.
Yep.
I would love to see less food waste. It is depressing to watch what gets thrown out and composted or just thrown out.
Yep.
And I don't know, I mean, we're an institution of education. I know one of the schools I work at, they will actually put out food that other kids can take. You're not going to eat your apple and throw it in the bowl. But it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart.
Yep. And
And seeing that big pie wedge really breaks my heart. I want to feed kids, but I don't want to leave the dumpsters.
And I think, I don't know if Dawn will be at the information meeting next week or this side. She would be the best one to answer that. I believe there are federal regulations that require how much food has to go out in order for a meal to be counted. But that's the extent of my knowledge on that.
Yeah, part of those federal requirements, even if a child, they keep saying, you have to have so many components on your plate. Even if the child says, I'm not going to eat that, they can't serve it without the component. It's required by the USDA. So I hear what you're saying, and at the same time, those guidelines are incredibly strict.
Big government.
Yeah.
Clarify too, will we continue to do free lunch for everyone in the years to come? Because I believe there's also a catch where if they will bring their own lunch and just get milk, they pay for it. If they get it with the lunch, they get it free. And I know that there are some kids who take the lunch, even though they brought their own, to avoid that extra charge.
50
So
cents.
something to think about. That may be why we have so much waste, or part of it.
I'm not aware of that, but we can certainly ask Don about it.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Does the compost get sent off, or do we use it in some of the gardens that we have on site?
I'm a little too sensitive to things like
We do a little bit of both, and we've had it kept here over the years. We haven't been as good about that lately, so
This is the first year we have a really nice garden back by our sugar house, and I've made contact with somebody who said, has some ideas to want to get that back active again. So if that happens, then we'll definitely be using the compost there on site.
So Act 127 has been in the news quite a bit the last 2 months. Just some background, Vermont guarantees equal access to funding for all students. The way that we do that in Vermont has been to adjust student counts, which adjusts tax rates, so that in theory, students that are more expensive to educate allows a district to raise more money to cover that. This was something that was set up under Act 60. When they did that, they didn't really have any data, or they didn't go seeking out any data in terms of how much more a high school student costs to educate than an elementary school or a pre-K kid, or a kid that was living in poverty. And so there were different weights assigned to those categories, but there was no real research to back that up. Act 127 was enacted in large part to correct that. So they conducted a study, did a lot of research, and they were able to say, okay, we now have a reasonably good idea that it costs X percent more to educate a kid who doesn't hear English at home compared to one that does. So while those weighting factors changed pretty significantly, the underlying formula did not. We come up with the amount of money that you allow us to spend, we figure out what we're going to get in grants, and then we ask the state to send us the difference, which is what we need. We basically divide that by the number of pupils we have, and that ultimately sets the tax rate that we have. So the more kids you have, the less per pupil spending you have, and the lower your tax rate. Districts like ours that have been historically disadvantaged, so we've been educating kids that we were not getting credit for. We're getting more credit for those weights. Those districts should be able to raise more money for the same tax rate that they've seen in the past. Or another way to look at it is the taxes we raised, the tax rate we had this year, last year, and the year before really should have raised more money than it did. Historically advantaged districts, those that have kind of benefited from those old weightings, were given a 5-year phase-in to sort of ease coming to terms with the student population that they're actually had and that they're responsible for educating. The way that they set that, that soft landing up ended up creating an incentive for some districts where they could spend as much money as they wanted and they didn't have to pay for it locally. Their tax rate would hit a ceiling. It wouldn't go any higher than that, whether they added $1 million or $10 million or $100 million. What that did is, because of the way we fund education in Vermont, if they pass a budget that's $10 million higher, the state is going to send them that $10 million and they need to get it from somewhere. And that somewhere was going to be districts like us who were not at that cap. Once we started looking at the budgets that were being warned, the state began to figure out that because of that spending, they had to keep dropping the yield number, which raised everybody's taxes. So even districts like ours and districts like Winooski, who saw the biggest gain in terms of students, eventually would drift up to that cap, and they wouldn't be able to raise any more money from the residential taxpayers. So in essence, they broke the system. The House earlier this week and the Senate today just passed a correction to that. There is still a glide path or a soft landing for those districts that saw a big drop in students. But the way that they've restructured it, districts like ours are not paying for that soft landing as directly as were in the past. So to kind of walk through the budgeting process that we've been through, in January, first week of January, this board adopted a budget, and they thought they were bringing a budget to you that was 1 cent down, roughly. We got some news the next week. They made some changes to their revenue predictions, and they started looking at those caps and what those costs were, and it looked like it was going to be, I don't know, it's maybe 3 cents higher. They started hearing from some folks that there was actually a lot of districts who were increasing their spending and that they didn't really have that information yet. So they did some additional data collection, and when the numbers came back, they realized that every district was going to hit that cap. If we didn't have the cap at that point, our tax rate would have gone up 38 cents. Because we couldn't rise that high, they were looking at huge increases to non-homestead taxpayers, which are not just folks who live out of state. It's people who own businesses. It's people who own rental properties who are going to pass that on to renters. So that was one lever that they had to make up that deficiency. The other one would be for people who are pay their taxes based on income, and they could kind of take away that income sensitivity. Rightfully, I think they didn't like either of those options, and so they have put through these changes, which we expect will be signed in the next day or two. As part of that change, they gave districts the ability to, even at this stage in the process, pull back their budgets and say, you know, we're not going to vote this, we're going to change it and rewarn it. This board and the board in Municipal Richford neither felt that they needed to do that, because when we were going through this budget process, we were not budgeting to that cap. We didn't think we were going to be anywhere close to it. So I feel like the budget decisions were still valid and staying the same, and so you will likely hear of some other districts in the state who have used that option and aren't going to vote until April or May. We're going forward with this, and we think it's a decent budget. And to kind of highlight some of the dramatic changes of Act 127 and those weights, we start with an average, 2-year average of the average daily membership, which is a kind of rough student count. For NMV, it starts out this year at just under 1,100 kids. So that would be the kids in your schools as well as the kids that you're paying high school tuition for. We get to count all of them. So 1,100 kids. 612 of them are deemed to live in poverty. We actually, with the new weights, get to count those 612 kids as 1,242 kids. So they're basically saying for every kid that lives in poverty, it costs roughly twice as much to educate them as it does someone who is not living in poverty. Under the old system, we would have gotten only maybe 70 or 25% of that. The factor was much smaller. For kids who are English language learners, we have 15 that are identified in NMV. We get to count them as 53. Under the old system, we counted them as 18. So they recognized under the old system they cost a little bit more, but they didn't really have that data. And so districts like ours that have high poverty rates, districts like Winooski that have high EL counts, districts like ours that have a lot of Small schools, relatively spread out population are also getting benefits under these new rates. And so that's why you're seeing some of the big increases, because the state is coming to recognize, yeah, you should have been getting more money to spend on your kids all along, and we're not correcting that. Sort of get into the budget. And so here, and this is in your book, and there's an updated version on the table, which you should take with you, which has these numbers, which are more current than the ones in the annual report. We, in order to determine a tax rate, we start with, again, the proposed budget, which is that first line, that number that you're going to be voting on in March. We back out the local grant revenue that we anticipate to get what's called education spending, and that's the number that I send to the state, and I say, this is what we need to cover our budget next year. You'll see that last year it was just under $19 million. Because I get asked this question a lot, I looked it up, and of that 19 million, 3.9 million is raised in property tax from residents in our 4 towns. 4.5 million is raised from non-residential property in our towns. And then the remaining 10.3 million is coming from outside of our district. And that's either the money that goes into the ed fund from the lottery, rooms and meals tax, but it's really primarily property taxes that are raised in other towns. And that's the sharing mechanism of Act 60, 68, and 127. Sharon?
Yeah, I'm confused. I know it's in here, but it's not the same numbers, but it isn't on this way.
Not on that. It's the latest numbers, the handout, the one pager that you have.
This one.
Yeah. And I can talk a little bit about the differences. And so for the tax rate, we start with your education spending, 22.6 million. We divide it by that student count, which we call weighted long-term membership, but that's basically the number of kids you get to count. We have roughly 1,000. We're getting to count almost 2,100, and that's because of those weights, because we have kids living in poverty, because we're in a rural part of the state. That gives you a per pupil ed spending amount. So we are spending, if this budget passes, $10,798 per weighted student. The dollar yield is a figure that's set by the legislature, and that's basically how much a dollar on the tax rate will raise per kid. So if our tax rate, if we were spending $97.75 per kid, we would have a $1 tax rate. You divide the per pupil spending by the dollar yield, and that gets you to that $10.47, which is today what we are projecting the district-wide tax rate will be. Last year, it ended up $15.15. I think when we went into town meeting, we thought it was going to be a little bit higher, but that yield number isn't set until May or June. So as of 7:30 today, we are anticipating a district-wide tax rate of $10.47. And that's the number that's on the sheet on the table, and that's not the number that's in the book, because that was old information. This is sort of a history since unification of what the tax rate has done. You'll see FY20 was the first year we had a combined budget. We really had gone through the budgeting process as separate districts and put them together at the last minute, but that was the first budget year as NMV, and then FY21 was the first year that we kind of went through the budgeting exercise as a unified district. You'll see that it was relatively steady the first 2 years, and it has been dropping off over the last 3. In large part, that is tied to the hot real estate market, which is increasing the grand list for the state. We can go to the next one. That $10.47 rate is the rate for all 4 towns. And then, as we talk about every year, and it is a messy concept. We need to apply that separately to each town because each town maintains their own grand list and they update it at different intervals. And so it can move away from what's called fair market value, sort of at different speeds. So in this case, Bakersfield CLA last year was 81.58%, which basically means that their grand list was undervalued by 81%. Or if you had a house in Bakersfield that was on the grand list for $150,000, it was really worth $184,000. Rather than the state changing your housing value on your tax bill, rather than bringing that up, they bring your tax rate up using that CLA. And so instead of the $1.15, Bakersfield's tax rate was $1.41. You can see that their CLA dropped pretty significantly this year, so they're now down to 74.25. So that $150,000 house, which is worth $184 last year, is now worth $202,000. So you can see that the real estate market has really been screaming up. There was some discussion early on in the legislative session, I don't know if it will get any legs, about taking those CLA figures and instead of applying them to a tax rate, applying them to your tax bill. So instead of opening that tax bill and saying, I've got a $150,000 house, but I'm being taxed $1.48, whereas my neighbor in Berkshire, which I know is in the same school district, has a lower tax rate. Instead, you would open up your tax bill and you say, my tax rate's $1.10, but my house is worth $202,000, and maybe my neighbor in Berkshire, who's got the exact same house, is looking at a house that's only $198,000 because of the relative values of the property in those towns. We'll see if that changes. But going through the four towns, here you'll see Berkshire CLA dropped also pretty significantly. And if you go to the next slide, both in Montgomery and Sheldon a little bit less so, those CLA numbers are falling. And so the tax rate has to rise to raise enough money on those lower property values. The last thing I would say on that, and Emily can back me up or contradict me, is when those CLAs drop below 80%, the state requires the town to go through the process of a reappraisal. There are not enough reappraisers in the state to cover all the towns that have now fallen below 80%. So I don't know if you've tried to go out to bid yet.
We have, we're looking at 2027 with an end date of 2028 before we're finalized.
So that's another 3 years of these values dropping. And the CLA makes it relatively fair from town to town, but from individual taxpayer to individual taxpayer. The state only knows that it has to apply that 75% to every property in Sheldon, but we know that those properties don't gain and lose value at the same rate. Somebody's property, just because of the view or because of what part of town they're in, really their value is going to go up, should go up more than others. And until you have a town-wide reappraisal, you're not really going to capture that. So this chart looks at the tax rates after CLA. So again, the black line with the round dots is that district rate that's been steadily going down since 2022. You'll see everyone's district rate, town level rate in that in those colored bands. They went down from 22 to 23, and then that real estate market started catching up with the calculations that the state does for CLA, and so the CLA is starting to pull that back up because those property values are so underinflated now. So this is a chart we bring to you every year. This is showing FY24 per pupil education spending. So that's the year that we're in now, the budgets that we're operating under right now, and it's divided by those kids, but it's using those new weights. And so if you see, starting from the bottom, There's a town that spends roughly $8,000 per kid, all the way up to $18,000 and change at the top. So a pretty significant spread. The two black lines show on top the statewide average and below that the Franklin County average. Those red lines scattered throughout are our neighbors in Franklin County, those other 5 districts. And then the two blue lines on the bottom, the lower one is where Northern Mountain Valley falls in terms of the rest of the state. So we're about 10th from the bottom in terms of per pupil spending. We know, the board knows that we're putting forth a significant budget increase. My anticipation is even with that passing, we're probably not going to move the needle too much, and we're certainly going to be below our county average, if not sticking in the bottom quarter of the state. Obviously, we don't know what other districts are doing. We don't really know where those other budgets are going to be warned for next year. But given the spending projections that are out there, the districts that we're hoped to be cutting spending with those new pupil weights, I don't think are going to be moving the needle much. So would you have a hand up on that one? Yeah. Both hands up.
Looking at the numbers and the graphs and like, goodness.
Yeah.
So I trust you folks with the numbers. I mean, it's mind-boggling to think of all of this, and I'm not going to nitpick this. I wish we weren't at the bottom, to be honest. But if we have such a high poverty rate, we're not going to pass a budget that's higher because people aren't going to vote for it. So you're kind of in a catch-22. The one thing I think about is hearing about the poverty, working particularly at the younger levels for all these years, and the fact that our kids are coming in less prepared than they were 30 or 40 years ago. I am concerned because you have a goal around literacy for 3rd grade. Language is such a critical piece, and by the time they hit kindergarten, we have this huge disparity. Talk to kindergarten teachers. You've got a bunch of kids above, and you've got a bunch of kids below, and we just have to keep plowing through, and we can teach them to do the basics of reading, to decode words, but they can't get meaning, which is what reading is all about. And I just think those first 5 years, somehow something has to change. I had a conversation with a kindergarten teacher in Berkshire today. Yesterday it was here. I am really concerned. The speech and language numbers, I mean, talk to Melissa, they're going through the roof. And, I'd like to think that things are happening at home, but they're not. And, is it because of the poverty? I don't know. I mean, I've been in a lot of homes that over the years where there was poverty, but I think it's maybe the disparity that I feel. That's maybe more what it is. We've always had kids that struggle, but a lot is going to have to change if this kindergarten class is going to make it to proficiency in 3 years. And I 2 teachers. And we're trying to figure out, because we want that goal, but how do we make it for everyone? And that concerns me.
Can I speak to that a little bit? So obviously we want that too. That's why that has become a priority. So I think that when you think about the investments and the trainings that we are embarking on as a result of that, all the work that Melissa is doing in early ed, the connections she's making to the birth to 3 population, like all of those efforts combined are targeted at that. We still have a lot of work to do. I think there's work that we could do around child find and making connections with some of those kids who are disconnected from services in those first 3 years. That's always going to be work that we need to do. But we're doubling down on our efforts around literacy in so many ways. And I do hope that you see that as being a part of the district. So much of the work has been focused on that. So we're going to keep plugging away at it, and it's going to continue to be a priority investment for the board, and it's going to continue to be priority work for all of our leaders. and our teachers.
That's all we can do.
I think to your point also, the notion of having more homeschool coordinators can really get to the heart of what's going on at home, making sure that work is getting home and that the family as a whole dynamic is really understanding what's going on. I think that's the huge value in those positions.
So also on your ballots that you'll see when you vote on town meeting day will be an article asking the district to authorize the board of directors to borrow money. This is a necessary article that we put on each year, and what it allows us to do is if a town doesn't lodge its grand list in time, the state doesn't know how much money to send us in September, and so they send us nothing. And that puts us in a tricky position. And so this gives us the authority to borrow against that money that we know is coming. We will be holding an informational meeting as well at Berkshire Elementary School on Tuesday at 6. We will do a similar presentation to this. There won't be any voting, but we'll kind of walk through the budget and remind people of the other articles that we're voting on. And then these are your polling locations. You can also vote early, as we can now with any election, by going to your town clerks when they're open or requesting an early ballot. But these are where you will do the vote in person on town meeting day. And I think that's it. So I will sit down, let Lynn talk, and then we can do the work and answer your questions.
So Sharon, you made a point earlier that I just want to speak to. You made the point about where we land in terms of per pupil spending and acknowledging, I think everybody in the room wishes that that's not where we are. This board has been preparing for Act 127 for several years because we've known that this opportunity is coming. And I think that there's a little bit of misconception in the public about the education spending. I've heard a little bit of that that has gotten back to me, and I just want to clarify that. Morgan did a great job of talking about Act 127, and I think that we are a perfect example of why this law was written, because our students have been historically disadvantaged by that funding system because that's the amount of money that we could get our communities to support in the budget, exactly to your point of we have that number of families who live in poverty, so it's very challenging to get people to approve spending more. So with this change in the law, we have the ability to spend more, to increase opportunities for our students in Franklin Northeast without it being an additional burden on you, on all of us as taxpayers. So this spending is up, and this board has made some really deliberate strategic decisions about where they're investing their money. And it's something that's necessary because many of us have children here. I now have a grandchild here in FNESU, and I think we all want for our kids the best, right? We don't have the kind of spending where we have had historically the ability to create some of those opportunities that we would have liked to for our students. So with this, we have added spending, and it's important for us to get these budgets approved because our students deserve these added opportunities in each of our schools. And I do not look at any of the budget decisions as being frivolous. These are really important for our students because our outcomes are not where I would like them. The outcomes are not where the boards would like them. Our teachers work incredibly hard. Our leaders work incredibly hard. Everyone is working to support our students. We're also navigating something that might not be visible to people that are not connected to schools, and that is the youth mental health crisis. And we have kids who have incredibly challenging mental health needs in our schools, and we have adults in our communities as well. And we're doing this, we're serving our students at a time where the resources that are available to us in the region are incredibly limited. We used to be able to contract with our mental health service provider to bring in services to support students. The wait lists that exist for those types of contracted services are incredibly long. We had a student a year or two ago that we were trying to get an alternative placement for. The wait list was 2 years long. We've had multiple students who've been turned down because there's not enough staffing. So we've done some really innovative things in Franklin Northeast, and Michelle's here, our special ed director, and I just want to acknowledge when we hit the struggle, we didn't fall on our heels, we got on our toes, and we started to get proactive about that. So we have developed alternative programs so that we're actually meeting our students' needs in-house. We have hired for positions that we've never historically had to hire for in order to be able to meet those needs in-house. Ironically, a couple of things happen. Not ironically, happily, a couple of things happen. We're starting to see more success in transitioning our students back from our own in our community alternative programs into our public schools because we're able to phase in the transition and push in supports and then pull back as the children have success. And we've been able to do that in several cases, and those are huge successes. The other thing that happened that we didn't necessarily anticipate is that the cost for that has been significantly lower, because when we were sending students out, our transportation costs were incredibly high. There were some programs where those transportation costs were up around $60,000 or $70,000 per child. So we've been able to, I think that's something that FNESU has always been able to do is like find a way to do a lot with not a lot of money and not a lot of resource. So we look forward to the opportunity that this budget will allow. A third of it, as Morgan said, is really connected to that high school tuition, but we do have some things added in here that we feel strongly will make a big difference for our students, and I think our students deserve that. So I do hope, this is an incredibly confusing budget year, and if you are listening to the media, it's all over the media talking about the percentage increase in the tax rates. I hope people look at us individually and don't lump their belief about this school budget into what they're hearing about the rest of the state, because I do think that we've been really thoughtful. We have added things which we should have based on where our spending was and how much our numbers grew as a result of this. This was the intention of 127. So I do encourage anybody who is watching, if you have questions about this, please reach out to us, and we're happy to answer your questions or attend another informational meeting about this budget. So, thank you.
Continually hear in this town, just comments about we shouldn't have ever merged, we shouldn't have ever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So having had a conversation with a school board member, just how to prophylactically deal with that before it comes up at meetings and things. I said we never should have merged, et cetera, et cetera. So I have found it very useful to have information about how to end the merge, because what I hear just on the street, in town, people talking, we should never have done it, we need to get out, we need to get out. And it isn't that simple. It's like a divorce, you joined in the marriage and you don't just get out. So if there's any information that could be part of a meeting, possibly, just in general, not to make it the topic, but to say, boy, when we merged back in blank year, just to know, I know that there are some folks who are unhappy about it, but in order to end that merge, there are steps that have to be taken. Anyone interested, let me know. But I hear that at the store, town clerk's office today. Just general talking, and the other thing that came up when the merger was being discussed was that a few people saying, you wait and see, they're going to take our school away. They want us to merge, and then, so just to reiterate, we've still got our school, we've still got our kids, we're still doing it. We're working hard to make sure all the children have an excellent education. I think sometimes those little things that help possibly the grumbling that happens in the background and the discontent in the background. And I think that the graphs are wonderful, and I like the last one, which definitely shows that we're sort of at the bottom of the heap. But to have it explained simply, you know, I don't know whether a handout, you folks know better than I'm just throwing out what my ears hear. As just really simple. And the thing, even with the kindergartners and what is happening in the poverty, and before we go down that rabbit hole of the end of the world, if we maybe don't focus on the awfulness of the situations, but hey, we got this kid, this is what they need, and we're not going to fix everything in the child's life. So let's take what we've got. What does the child need in the time I've got with that child? And really kind of, because it is hard right now with politics, with everything, it's so easy to go, oh my gosh, it's just never going to catch up. It's awful. It's terrible. And I'm not saying it isn't awful and terrible. I'm just saying it doesn't give us more energy to get out of the mode of it's awful, it's terrible. What are we going to do with that family or that family? If their families, their people, what does the family need without, you know, destroying anything that might be positive within it, in our own angst towards the dysfunction? I don't know, I'm just throwing that out as a way. I would like to see the budget pass. I'm already hearing, just in general, we never should have merged anyways. It's like, oh, good Lord, stop. Because, you know, it's not 10 people sitting down at town meeting and saying, I'm done, we need to get out of the merger. It's not going to work because there's a process. So even if there's a, you know, in order to end our participation in the merger, it's not just 20 people saying it. And all that chatter, it just goes on and down and down. So I don't know, it's just a thought, you know.
It would be helpful, and I maybe, I don't know if you want to speak to it or not, but from my vantage point, it would be incredibly helpful to know what's behind that. Because when I look at our data and I look at our funding, if you look at what our education spending has done since we merged, I think that Bakersfield has been better. I mean, your CLAs, we can't control what's happened with the property values, but in terms of what our education spending is, I think it has been better. And I think when you really look at what's happening this year with our budget, when you have $1 million connected to high school tuition, I was a principal in Berkshire for 11 years, and 1 year I had $156,000 worth of high school tuition that we didn't budget for. So Sharon worked for me at the time. We froze our budgets in October, and we never unfroze them for the year because we didn't have the money. The ability that we have right now is we all share in that cost, so it doesn't take one school and wreck a tiny budget. When you have all combined, that's one of the benefits too, that it gets spread out. So no one school has like frozen spending. We find a way to make that work.
And I agree, and somebody looking at the budget much more thoroughly than I did, they made the comment to me like, you know, we're really better off, but that is the thing. I hear it, it's like, what would it have cost without the merger? I don't know that those figures can be brought forward because they're sort of imaginary, but when people say, well, you know, it's costing this much, and if we weren't merged, it would only be, it's like, no, you're wrong, but concrete information, because that's one other thing. I wonder how much it would cost to run Bakersfield if we hadn't merged. Probably not as much. And I'm going, I don't think you're correct on that, but I don't have the simple, not to involve, simple, without it this, with it that, these are the figures, and then to sort of disengage from some of those conversations because they're not based on fact. They're just sort of just pulled from the sky. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out because, and that's just me in town with my ears and thinking, oh, you're kind of not making sense here. kind of not making sense, but I think it has to be really simple. And with one person, I just said, listen, you don't just unmerge. It's a process. And you need to know what the process is. And if you feel that strongly, go do it. But I'm not going to continue the conversation because it's not going to go anyplace. And just, good or bad or indifferent or whatever, it wouldn't go anyplace. So I don't know, just to throw that out. And I have no ideas of how to fix it, but I think there's just the information, just nuts and bolts. This is the information, and then when it goes on, and even with, the world is awful, yep, but.
And I will speak to that, Jan. When I meet with other colleagues, it is only to put our heads together, to figure out what we can do. It is not to
solve the
complain.
problem.
Exactly.
Yes.
This is this child's situation. We're not going to give up. And what can we do? Because sometimes I have to have that perspective. Okay, talk to me about this child in relation to the rest of the class, because my caseload is special ed. And sometimes I get kids that are just speech, but I realize there's more than just speech going on here, and there's academic, there's language, and I just need to get that affirmation, and then we need to kind of think about, okay, how are we going to do this? Because one of the things I learned really quickly, and anybody who's in education knows, a child's learning style becomes very apparent, and some kids take a lot longer, need a lot of different opportunities. And it doesn't matter what you're working on. You start to see that. It's when we hire out for psychologists to do the cognitive testing, we get a lot of information. But you start to see that as an educator, how this kid needs lots of opportunities. This kid needs visuals. And that's the kind of stuff I just want to talk with the teacher to say, what can we do? Because I'm seeing some things that is more than what is my area. I think there's more out there. And we just try to put our heads together and do the best we can. And, I'm not blaming parents. I think some parents have we have a lot of mental health with adults.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
So, yeah,
but we keep charging.
we keep charging. That's right.
I don't know, just to throw that out.
Well, I appreciate your thoughts, certainly. And I believe truly, and I saw this, I was on the board through merger. I think we are stronger together. This is a board of people from 4 towns across Franklin County. We consider all these kids all our kids, regardless of the town they live in. We are stronger together. We have a way to buffer some of the unpredictable things that arise fiscally. The example of high school tuition, we are able to spread that among the 4 towns. We can better support the physical buildings, the structures, the need to maintain grounds and boilers and fuel tanks, and just there's so much that goes into, running the district and being really we try our very hardest to be so transparent, hence this really detailed, presentation on Morgan's part, to really show people that we are being transparent in how we are spending these precious resources, while at the same time trying so hard to increase opportunity and to not be at the very bottom of that chart anymore, because it behooves all of us to spend the needed resources to educate all these children across all 4 towns really well and send them out into the world to be successful in whatever path they choose. I think that I can understand why there might be this kind of knee-jerk reaction to think that people might want to divorce the district and be better but you would not necessarily be immune from the forces that drive budgets. I mean, this is an expensive time to live in, things, inflationary pressures, health insurance. These are things that we would, whether you are part of NMV or a single district, you are still at the mercy of some of these forces. And again, with a collective budget, we're able to create more opportunity and help uplift, all, and support all the schools, truly. And we want people to communicate those concerns. We can provide data and information, and that would be helpful to kind of clarify it and help people understand. There's always a little bit of sticker shock when you see these big numbers, but it's really important to contextualize them. Listen to this meeting, come next Tuesday, reach out to us with questions, clarification, because again, a lot of the forces that drive these budgets aren't in our control. Fuel costs, food costs, health insurance costs, the number of high school students that we pay tuition to other schools that set their tuition amounts. So we are required, we're obligated to pay that amount. We need to educate our high schoolers. And then I think what's unique in this budget cycle is Act 127. It's profoundly influential in kind of this opportunity piece that we are talking about, this ability that we have to add all the different staff that we saw, the music in Bakersfield, health teachers, STEM teachers, again, focus on opportunities. We're very fortunate that finally from the state and the legislature, where legislation is kind of being passed that recognizes that we're serving a population that has been underserved historically. We have been an underserved system, and this is an amazing, really, truly an amazing opportunity to create more opportunity for our students across this district. So without the kind of fiscal tax harm that would have otherwise kind of resulted from the increase that we're seeing. And so I think that's this piece that I really hope people can kind of ask questions, talk to your neighbors, talk to people in the store, talk to people at the post office, and help folks understand that, this is a budget that's, it's an integrous budget. It's thoughtful. We're always mindful of our taxpayers. We're also trying to create these opportunities to lift up all our students. And I know it's so complicated. I mean, thank goodness for Morgan and his ability to really distill this in a way that, most of us lay people can mostly wrap our heads around. And we still need to lean on Morgan to clarify some of these complexities. So, we are always happy to field questions and concerns. I would really hope that the people that are concerned that somehow merger has had a negative impact would really talk to us, because we can really provide the data that shows that it has been really advantageous across the board for all the towns. And I think that we're fortunate that we have a really innovative, passionate, staff, administration, central office working tirelessly to try to do our best by these students, by the people in our communities. And that's just my plea in a way, because we have to get past just the sticker shock and recognize that this is a really thoughtful budget, and it's an exciting time to be able to really work toward increasing opportunities for all of our kids across the district. So anyway, I really appreciate everyone coming. Are there any final questions? Please do encourage your neighbors and your friends to watch the video, to reach out to the board or to Morgan and Lynn if you have any further questions. We'll have another informational meeting next Tuesday at 6 o'clock. That's the 27th of February in Berkshire at the school. And we'll be going over the presentation again. So encourage people to come out who maybe weren't able to make it tonight. And I really just hope that people will encourage folks to pass this budget. It's the right thing to do. This is what our students need. So thank you all so much for coming. We'll make a motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all so much.